In the middle of a noisy city, where people rushed through their days without even looking at each other, a quiet man stood outside a tall office building every morning. He was the security guard. His uniform was a little faded, his shoes had lost their shine, and his face showed signs of long days under the sun. Yet he carried a calm smile that made him different from everyone else who passed by. Every day before the building even opened, he swept the front area, wiped the glass doors, and made sure everything looked clean and welcoming. When people started arriving, he greeted each one with the same warm, "Good morning," even though most never responded. They were too busy looking at their phones or thinking about work. Still, he never stopped greeting them. It had become part of who he was. He believed that kindness didn't need to be noticed, it just needed to be real. He lived far from the city in a small rented room with his wife and little daughter. His home was simple. One small bed, a tiny fan, and a single light that flickered now and then. Despite earning very little, he never complained. He would bring home small treats for his daughter whenever he could, like a piece of sweetbread or a used storybook he found at the market. His greatest joy was watching her smile. Each morning he left home before sunrise, walking through quiet streets and catching 2 buses to reach work on time. He often skipped breakfast so his daughter could have more food. When he reached the building, he would drink a glass of water, adjust his cap, and get ready for another long day of standing guard. He didn't have much, but he was proud of his job. He believed protecting others, even in small ways, was something to be respected. People often ignored him, but he didn't mind. He noticed things others missed. The old lady who struggled to open the heavy door, the delivery boy sweating under the sun, the tired janitor carrying too much weight. Whenever he could, he helped quietly. He held the door open, carried a few boxes, or shared his umbrella when it rained. No one asked him to. He just did it because it felt right. One cold evening, when the sky had turned gray and most workers had gone home, he noticed a stray dog lying near the gate. The dog looked weak, its ribs showing through thin fur, its eyes half closed. People walked past, pretending not to see it. The guard stood there for a moment, feeling a pinch in his chest. He opened his lunchbox. There wasn't much inside, just a few pieces of flatbread and vegetables. He tore one piece in half and placed it near the dog. The dog sniffed it, wagged its tail slowly, and ate. From that day on, the dog started waiting for him every evening. The guard began saving a small portion of his meal each day for his new friend. He didn't tell anyone about it. It was just between him and the dog. Seeing the animal waiting for him made his long day feel lighter. Sometimes he would talk softly to it while sitting on the steps. "You must be hungry, my friend," he would say. "Don't worry, I've got something for you." One night, while he was feeding the dog, a strong wind blew through the street. Papers scattered everywhere, and the guard rushed to pick them up before they blew too far. As he did, a young office worker leaving the building saw him and stopped for a moment. She noticed how carefully he gathered every piece of paper, making sure the area stayed clean even when no one was watching. When he finished, he smiled at her politely and said, "Good night, miss," before going back to feed the dog. She walked away quietly, but something about his calmness stayed in her mind. The next morning, the same woman came to work early. She saw him again, standing straight by the gate, greeting people like always. She nodded slightly at him, and for the first time, he noticed someone actually returned his greeting. That small moment made his morning feel brighter. He didn't expect much from life. Just little things like that meant the world to him. As the days passed, more people began to notice small things he did. He helped a delivery driver who dropped a box, gave directions to a lost visitor, and once even lent his own jacket to a worker who forgot theirs in the cold. Still, he never expected thanks. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what was right. Every night after his shift, he sat on the bench near the building for a few minutes before catching the last bus home. The dog would lie beside him, resting its head on his leg. He'd gently pat its back and look at the city lights in the distance. "One day," he whispered to himself, "I'll give my daughter a better life, maybe a home where she can see the stars." Even though he didn't know how that would happen, hope kept him going. At home, his wife would wait for him with a warm smile. She worried about him standing all day, but he always told her not to worry. "I'm fine," he'd say, "as long as I can come home to you and our little girl." His daughter loved hearing stories from him before sleeping. He would tell her about the people he met, making the tales sound magical. "Today I saw a man who carried flowers for his wife," he'd say. That's love, my dear. Always do kind things like that. His wife sometimes looked at him with quiet admiration. They didn't have much money, but they had peace. They didn't argue. They shared everything, and they believed better days would come if they kept working hard and stayed kind. Back at work, the dog became a familiar sight. It followed the guard around and wagged its tail whenever he smiled. Some office workers found it amusing, while others complained that a stray dog didn't belong near the building. The guard never argued. He simply nodded and moved the dog away when asked. But when no one was looking, he'd still sneak out food and water for it. One day, a group of children from a nearby school stopped by, selling handmade cards for charity. The guard bought one, even though it cost almost half his daily meal budget. When they asked why, he said, "Because someone out there needs it more than I need my lunch." The children thanked him with big smiles, and he kept the small card in his pocket. That evening, when he sat with the dog, he took out the card and smiled at it. It said, "Kind hearts are never wasted." He didn't know it, but those words would stay with him for a long time. By the end of the month, everyone in the building knew the guard's face, even if they didn't know his name. Some began to greet him back. Others started smiling when they passed by. Slowly, without realizing it, his quiet kindness was softening the coldness around that busy place. The office workers began helping each other more, greeting the janitor, thanking the cleaners, and even leaving food for the stray dog. The man who once went unnoticed had unknowingly changed the way people saw kindness. Still, he remained the same, humble, polite, and always smiling. Each evening after locking the gates, he sat beside his dog, looking up at the sky. "We did good today, didn't we?" he whispered softly. The dog wagged its tail, and the streetlight above flickered like a small star. He didn't know that his simple acts were only the beginning of a story that would touch many hearts. The world around him was about to change in ways he never imagined, all because of the quiet kindness of one humble man who believed that goodness, no matter how small, still had the power to make a difference. Days passed into weeks, and the security guard's quiet life continued with the same rhythm. Every morning he stood by the gate smiling and greeting people, and every evening he fed the stray dog that had now become his faithful companion. The dog waited for him near the same corner each day, wagging its tail the moment it saw him coming. It had become their little ritual, a bond formed in silence and trust. The office workers began to notice this small friendship. Some found it sweet, while others found it strange that a grown man would share his food with a street animal. But the guard didn't care what anyone thought. To him, kindness was never a waste. The dog in his eyes wasn't just a stray. It was a soul that needed care just like anyone else. One afternoon, while he was sitting on the steps near the gate, a young woman from the office walked by. She had seen him many times before but never really paid attention. This time she noticed the way he tore his bread carefully and placed it on a small paper for the dog. The way he smiled at the animal as if talking to an old friend made her stop for a moment. She found herself smiling too. The next day she brought an extra sandwich in her lunchbox. When she walked past the gate, she handed it to him and said softly, "For your friend." He looked surprised but grateful. "Thank you, miss," he said with a small nod. That evening he shared the sandwich with the dog, saving half for himself. It was the first time in a while someone had done something kind for him. After that, the young woman often stopped for a short chat. She learned that he had a family living far away, and that his daughter loved reading stories even though they could not afford new books. He told her he dreamed of saving enough to send his daughter to school one day. There was nothing dramatic in the way he said it, just simple hope, spoken with a calm tone that made her heart ache. Over time, she began bringing books her younger brother no longer needed. "Maybe your daughter will like these," she said shyly. The guard was touched. He carefully wrapped the books in a plastic bag, afraid they might get dirty during his long ride home. "You're very kind," he said quietly. "She will be very happy." However, even as joy filled his heart, he didn't realize that more challenges were ahead. A few days later, he received a letter from his landlord, informing him that the building he lived in was going to be demolished. They had only a month to move out. The news hit him like a storm. He had just begun to feel stable again, and now he had to start over. Finding another place with his small salary seemed impossible. He didn't tell anyone at work about it. He didn't want to burden them again. But as days passed, the stress showed on his face. He looked more tired and his smile began to fade. The young woman noticed it first. "You look worried," she said one afternoon. He tried to laugh it off, but she pressed gently. "Please tell me what's wrong." After a pause, he finally told her about the notice. "We'll manage," he said quietly. "We always do." That evening, she gathered a few colleagues and shared the news. "He helped us all when we didn't even realize it," she said. "Maybe it's time we help him again." The next morning, the entire office began searching for rental homes near the area. Some made phone calls. Others offered to contribute money for his deposit. The manager, too, decided to extend his help, saying, "Good people deserve good things." When they finally told the guard about their plan, he was overwhelmed. He couldn't believe people were doing so much for him again. "You've done enough already," he said, his voice shaking. "Please, I can't take more." But they insisted. "You didn't ask for help, remember? That's what makes you special," one of them said. "This time you just have to accept it." A few weeks later, he moved into a small but comfortable apartment with his wife and daughter. It wasn't big, but it was safe, clean, and close to his work. On the first night there, his daughter looked around the new home with wide eyes and said, "Papa, this place feels happy." He smiled and replied, "It does, doesn't it? Maybe happiness isn't about how big a place is. It's about how much love it holds." At work the next day, everyone welcomed him warmly. Even Buddy seemed to sense his joy, wagging its tail and running circles around him. The guard looked at the people around him, people who once rushed past him without a glance and felt grateful. The city hadn't changed, but his little world had. He now knew that kindness could grow quietly, just like sunlight slipping through clouds. He sat on the same steps that evening, sharing his meal with Buddy as usual. The street was calm, the lights soft, and the sounds of laughter from the nearby cafe filled the air. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't a prayer, just a simple word filled with peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he knew one thing for sure. Kindness always finds its way back, no matter how far it travels. Days turned into months, and the guard's life began to find a calm rhythm again. His daughter's health improved slowly, and each phone call from home carried better news. The office staff continued to ask about her, always eager to know how she was doing. Every time someone showed concern, his eyes softened with gratitude. "She's doing better," he would say with a small smile. "She's even started reading again." The dog still met him every evening. It had become something everyone in the building knew about. The sight of the old guard feeding his loyal companion near the gate had become almost symbolic. Some people even began bringing dog food or biscuits for him to share. The bond between the man and the animal reminded everyone that kindness didn't need words. It just needed heart. But though life seemed peaceful, the guard carried quiet worries within him. His job didn't pay much, and even after the help he received, he still had debts to clear. Sometimes while standing by the gate, he thought about how uncertain everything was. He was getting older, and his body often ached from standing all day. Yet he never let that affect his smile. He believed that no matter how hard life got, there was always something to be grateful for. One evening, as he was closing the gate, the young woman who had first helped him came by with a cheerful expression. "Guess what?" she said. "Our company is organizing a charity event next week. I've told them about you." The guard looked surprised. "About me?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, about your kindness, your story, and how you care for everyone here. They want you to be part of it." He didn't know what to say. "But I'm just a security guard," he said softly. "I don't belong in such events." The woman smiled. "You do," she said. "You've inspired more people than you realize." The day of the event came and the guard wore his cleanest uniform. The hall was decorated with lights and banners. People from the offices gathered, and a few guests were invited to share stories of hope and kindness. When his turn came, he hesitated at first. Standing before a crowd wasn't something he had ever done. But when he saw the kind faces in front of him, the same people who once hurried past him without a glance, he found the courage to speak. He told them about his life in simple words. He spoke about his family, his daughter, and the dog who never left his side. He talked about how kindness had returned to him when he least expected it. His voice trembled at times, but his honesty touched everyone. There was silence in the room as he finished with a soft smile. "Sometimes," he said, We think we have nothing to give. But even a smile, a kind word, or a little help can change someone's life. It changed mine. When he stepped down from the stage, people clapped warmly. Some had tears in their eyes. The manager of the company came forward and thanked him personally. "You've reminded us what real humanity means," the manager said. "You've done more good here than you can imagine." After that day, things began to change even more. The company decided to start a small fund to help their lower staff employees in emergencies, something inspired directly by the guard's story. They even increased his salary slightly, not as charity but as recognition of his service and character. The guard was overwhelmed but remained humble. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just tried to be kind." Weeks later, the dog suddenly stopped showing up at the gate. For days, the guard searched around the nearby streets, calling out softly, but the animal didn't return. He missed the dog deeply. It had been more than just a pet. It had been his companion through lonely evenings. Some of the office workers noticed his sadness. "Maybe it found a new home," one of them said, trying to comfort him. The guard nodded but couldn't hide the emptiness he felt. One rainy night, as he stood by the gate holding his small umbrella, he saw a familiar shape limping toward him through the rain. His eyes widened. It was the dog. Wet, thin, but alive. He rushed forward, placed his jacket around the trembling animal, and whispered, "You came back." The dog leaned against his legs, tail wagging weakly. It was one of those rare moments where words were useless, only love spoke. He took the dog to a nearby clinic the next morning, paying the little he had to make sure it got treated. The vet said it had been hurt but would recover soon. When the guard returned to work, everyone asked about the dog, cheering when they heard it would be fine. The woman who had once given him a sandwich smiled and said, "You see, even your friend knows his way back to you." As time went on, the bond between the people in that building grew stronger. The guard's presence reminded them daily of compassion and gratitude. They began greeting each other more often, helping the cleaners, offering rides to the staff who worked late. Small acts of care had become part of the place's spirit, and it all started with one humble man who never stopped believing in goodness. One day, the manager called him inside and handed him an envelope. "This is from all of us," he said. "We've collected it so you can visit your family for a few weeks. You deserve it." The guard's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was enough money for travel and some extra for his daughter's schooling. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Finally, he looked up and said, "You have given me more than I ever dreamed of. Thank you." When he reached home after a long journey, his daughter ran to him, healthier than before, her eyes bright with excitement. "Papa, I read all the books you sent," she said proudly. His wife welcomed him with tears of happiness. They ate together that night, laughing softly as the rain tapped on the roof. He felt peace in his heart, a peace that came not from wealth but from love. Before returning to work, he visited the small temple near his home. He placed a few coins in the donation box and whispered a prayer, not for himself but for all the people who had helped him when he was at his weakest. "May they always be blessed," he said quietly. When he came back to the city, everyone greeted him warmly. The dog barked happily at his return, and the office workers clapped when they saw him at the gate again. Life went on, simple but full of meaning. The world outside was still busy, still loud, but inside that building, kindness had found a home. And though he never thought of himself as a hero, in the eyes of those who knew him, he was more than that. He was proof that even in a world where people often rush past one another, a single act of kindness can start a chain that never truly ends. The days passed quietly after the guard returned from his visit home. He looked calmer now, his steps a little lighter, his smile more peaceful. His daughter's laughter over the phone had become the best part of his evenings. He would often sit outside the security cabin after his shift, talking to her about school, books, and her dreams. She always ended their calls by saying, "One day I'll make you proud, Papa." And he would smile, replying softly, "You already have." At work, things continued to change for the better. The kindness he had once received had now spread among everyone in the building. The cleaning staff and helpers were treated with more respect, and people had started to greet them warmly. Some even brought small gifts during festivals, something that never happened before. The guard often watched this with quiet pride, knowing that his story had somehow opened hearts. But one morning as he walked toward the gate, he felt a slight pain in his chest. He stopped for a moment, pressing his hand against it, but brushed it off, thinking it was just tiredness. He had been working extra hours lately to save a little more for his daughter's education. "I'm fine," he whispered to himself and continued with his duty. The dog, who never left his side, seemed to sense something was wrong. It followed him more closely than usual, often resting its head on his foot whenever he sat down. The guard chuckled. "You're more caring than most people I know," he said, but deep inside he knew he needed rest. The weather had turned colder, and the long hours were starting to take a toll on his aging body. That evening, when most of the office staff had left, the young woman who had once helped him came by the gate. She noticed he looked pale. "Are you all right?" she asked with concern. Yes, he replied quickly. "Just a bit tired, nothing to worry about." But she wasn't convinced. "You should go home early," she said. He smiled faintly. "No, I'll stay until everyone's gone. That's my job." Later that night, when the building was finally quiet, he sat on the bench outside looking at the stars. He thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the struggles, the kindness, the moments of despair and hope. He whispered a small prayer of thanks, not for wealth or comfort, but for the simple blessing of being able to help others and to be helped in return. A few weeks later, a new construction project started near the building. The constant noise, dust, and trucks made his work harder. One afternoon, a small child from a nearby street came running toward the gate, chasing a ball that rolled onto the road. At the same moment, a truck turned the corner at high speed. Without thinking twice, the guard rushed forward, grabbed the child, and pulled him to safety. The truck screeched to a halt just a few feet away. Everyone nearby froze in shock. The child's mother came running, tears in her eyes, thanking him repeatedly. The guard just smiled gently. "Be careful next time," he said, patting the boy's head. But later that night, when he sat down, the pain in his chest returned, stronger this time. He closed his eyes, trying to breathe slowly. The dog whined and nudged his leg, worried. "It's okay, friend," he whispered weakly. "Just tired again." The next morning, he didn't show up at his usual time. The building staff noticed his absence immediately because he was never late. The young woman called his phone, but there was no answer. Worried, she and 2 other staff members went to his small rented room nearby. When they knocked, there was no response. The landlord came with a spare key, and when they opened the door, they found him sitting by the window, eyes closed, with the dog resting quietly beside him. He had passed away peacefully during the night. The news spread through the building like a wave. Everyone who knew him, officers, cleaners, even people from nearby shops, felt the loss deeply. For a man who had so little, he had left behind so much warmth. The company arranged a small memorial for him at the same place where he once shared his story. People spoke about how he had changed their lives without even realizing it. The manager, holding back tears, said, "He reminded us what it means to be human." The young woman placed a framed photo of him on the table beside a small flower arrangement. She looked around at the gathered crowd and said softly, "He taught us that kindness doesn't need power or wealth. It only needs a heart that cares." Everyone nodded in silence. The dog was there too, sitting quietly near the table as if it understood everything. Later that week, the company decided to create a small scholarship fund in his daughter's name. They called it the Guardian's Hope, in honor of the man who had protected not just the building but the spirit of everyone in it. When his daughter received the news, she couldn't stop crying. "He always said kindness never goes to waste," she told the company over a video call. Now I know he was right. Months passed, but his memory stayed alive in every corner of that place. The staff often shared stories about him, how he smiled through pain, how he helped others quietly, how he never complained even when life was unfair. Every new employee who joined was told about him, and about the day the humble guard saved a child's life. The dog still came to the gate every day. The workers had built a small shelter for it near the entrance and took turns feeding it. It had become a part of their family, just like its owner once was. Some evenings, when the wind blew gently through the courtyard, the dog would look toward the gate and wag its tail, as if expecting him to walk out again in his neat uniform with that kind smile. Years later, the young woman, now older and in a higher position at the company, stood at the same gate where it had all begun. The dog had passed away by then, and the building had changed a lot. New paint, new faces, but the memory of the guard remained. She looked at the small plaque beside the gate that read, "In memory of the guard who showed us the strength of kindness." She smiled softly and whispered, You'll never be forgotten. As she stood there watching people come and go, she realized how much one person's goodness could shape the world around them. The man had never been rich or powerful, yet his simple acts of care had left a mark that time couldn't erase. His kindness had grown roots through the people he touched, through the child he saved, through his daughter's education, and through every good deed that followed his example. And in that quiet evening light, it almost felt as if his spirit was still there, standing by the gate with the same gentle watchfulness, making sure everyone who passed by felt safe, not just from harm, but from the coldness of the world. Even after all the years, people still spoke of him with respect. He was just a guard, some would say, but others would correct them softly. No, he was more than that. He was a reminder that humanity still exists. And so the story of the humble guard lived on, not in books or newspapers, but in hearts. In every small act of kindness, in every person who chose to help another without expecting anything back, a part of him continued to live. That was his real legacy, a life that proved goodness never truly dies. As the days went by, a few other office workers began noticing their small conversations. Curiosity spread quickly, and soon more people started stopping by the gate. Some asked him how long he had been working there. Others simply greeted him with a smile. The same people who once walked past him without a glance were now starting to see him differently. The building felt warmer somehow, as if his kindness had spread like sunlight through the cracks of their busy lives. But life is never smooth for long. One night after finishing his shift, the guard received a phone call from home. His wife's trembling voice told him their daughter had fallen very sick. He felt the world spin for a moment, fear rushing through his body. He wanted to go home immediately, but he couldn't afford to miss work. His pay was small and every day mattered. He promised his wife he would find a way to help and ended the call with his heart heavy and eyes wet. For the next few days he worked as usual, though his smile seemed weaker. He still greeted people, still fed the dog, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes that even strangers could notice. He began skipping his own meals completely so he could send a little extra money home for medicine. The dog waited for him each evening, wagging its tail as always, unaware that its friend was breaking inside. One evening, the young woman noticed how pale he looked. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He nodded quickly, pretending to be fine. "Just a little tired," he said. But when she saw his hands shaking, she knew something was wrong. Later that day, she saw him sitting on the bench outside, staring at his phone with tears in his eyes. She quietly walked over and asked what had happened. After a moment of hesitation, he told her the truth, that his daughter was very sick and the hospital bills were too high for him to pay. He didn't ask for help. He never did. He just spoke softly, like someone sharing a heavy secret. The woman felt her throat tighten. She wanted to help but didn't know how. "She'll be fine," he said, forcing a smile. "She's a strong little girl." Then he looked up at the sky and added, "I just pray every night that she gets better." The next morning, the young woman shared the story with a few of her colleagues. They were deeply moved. "He's been here for years," one of them said. "He's the one who helps everyone around and now he needs help himself." Soon, people began pooling small amounts of money together. Some contributed quietly, leaving envelopes near his desk. Others brought him meals or asked how his family was doing. He didn't understand at first why people were suddenly being so kind, but when he realized what they were doing, his eyes filled with tears. He tried to refuse, saying, "Please, I can't take your money." But they insisted. "You've helped all of us in your own way," the woman said. "Now it's our turn." The office staff even spoke to the building manager, who agreed to contribute and allowed the guard to take a few days off to visit his daughter. That night, he went home earlier than usual, carrying the money carefully wrapped in a piece of cloth. When he reached his small home, his wife was surprised to see him. "You came early," she said, her voice trembling with worry. He nodded and placed the money in her hands. "People helped us," he said softly. "They didn't even know our daughter, but they helped." His wife covered her face and cried quietly. Their daughter, lying on the small bed, smiled weakly when she saw him. "Papa, you came," she whispered. He held her hand gently and said, "Of course I came. Everything will be okay now." For the first time in weeks, there was light in his eyes again. After the hospital visit, he returned to work feeling grateful but humble. He thanked everyone who helped him, though he still felt it wasn't enough. He didn't like being the center of attention, but his story had already touched many hearts. People began calling him Uncle instead of Sir. They offered him tea in the mornings, asked about his daughter, and treated him like family. The stray dog. His silent friend still waited for him each day. When he returned, the dog wagged its tail faster than ever. The guard smiled and said, "I told you things would be fine." He sat down on the steps, broke his bread into pieces, and shared it like old times. For the first time in many weeks, he truly enjoyed his meal. Little did he know that this small wave of kindness was just the beginning of something much bigger. The people who helped him were already planning to do more. They wanted to make sure his family never suffered again, but the guard didn't know that yet. To him, life had already given him a miracle, the kindness of strangers and the health of his daughter. As he looked at the quiet street and the faithful dog beside him, he smiled to himself. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. Maybe kindness really did come back when you least expected it. The security guard's life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but things didn't feel the same anymore. The people around him had changed. The once quiet and distant office workers now greeted him every morning with a smile. Some even stopped to talk for a moment before rushing off to work. He wasn't invisible anymore, and though he was shy about it, he felt a small warmth deep inside. It felt nice to be seen, not just as a guard, but as a person. His daughter's health was improving day by day. Every evening when he came home, she would sit on his lap telling him stories from the books the young woman had given her. Her laughter filled the tiny room again, and her mother's eyes no longer looked as tired. The guard often sat quietly listening to them talk, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in months. Sometimes he thought about how life could change so quickly, from hopelessness to gratitude, all because of kindness. Back at work, the dog remained his faithful companion. Rain or shine, it waited near the same spot, wagging its tail whenever it saw him. People had started calling the dog Buddy, and it had become a familiar face around the building. Some workers even brought extra food or water for it. The once lonely stray now had more friends than it ever imagined. Every evening, the guard still shared his meal with Buddy, talking to him softly about the day's events. It was their little world, built on silent understanding. But even as things seemed better, the guard's struggles didn't end completely. He still had debts to pay from his daughter's hospital stay, and his old shoes were beginning to tear. He worked longer hours, often covering shifts for others just to earn a little extra. His body was tired, but his spirit stayed strong. He never complained. Whenever someone asked how he was doing, his answer was always the same: "I'm doing fine, thank you." One afternoon, the young woman who had helped him first came down to the gate with a worried look. "You're working extra shifts again?" she asked. He smiled. "Yes, but it's all right. Work keeps me moving." She looked at him and sighed. "You should rest sometimes too," he nodded, though they both knew he wouldn't. He was the kind of man who believed that every small sacrifice was worth it if it meant his family was safe. A few weeks later, the company announced an upcoming festival celebration. The staff decided to decorate the entire building and include everyone who worked there: the janitors, the cleaners, and even the security guards. It was the first time they had thought of including him in something like that. When they handed him a small invitation card, he looked surprised. "Me?" he asked softly. "Of course," the young woman said. "You're part of this place too." That evening, as he walked home, he kept looking at the card in his hand. It was just a simple piece of paper, but it meant the world to him. He showed it to his wife and daughter proudly, saying, "They invited me too." His wife smiled warmly, happy to see him so cheerful. His daughter clapped her hands and said, "You have to go, Papa. Maybe they'll have sweets there." He laughed, feeling like a child himself for a moment. The day of the festival arrived, and the building looked brighter than ever. Colorful lights hung from the walls, and music played softly in the background. The guard wore his cleanest uniform, polished his shoes as best he could, and stood proudly by the entrance. People greeted him as they came in, and some even took photos with him and Buddy. He felt shy but happy. During the event, the manager called everyone together for a short speech. He talked about teamwork, honesty, and kindness, and then, unexpectedly, mentioned the guard's name. "Sometimes," the manager said, "the greatest lessons come from the simplest people among us. There's one man here who reminds us every day that kindness still exists. He never asks for anything, yet gives more than most of us do. Everyone turned to look at the guard who stood frozen, not knowing what to do. The manager then handed him a small envelope and said, "This is a token of appreciation from all of us. Thank you for reminding us what it means to be human." The room filled with applause. The guard's eyes filled with tears and his hands trembled as he accepted the envelope. I was just doing my duty," he said softly. The manager smiled. "And that's exactly why it matters." That night, when the celebration ended, the guard sat quietly on the steps outside with Buddy by his side. He opened the envelope and found a letter and a small bonus amount. But what touched him most wasn't the money. It was the handwritten message that read, "Thank you for teaching us kindness." He stared at those words for a long time, his heart full. He gently patted Buddy's head and whispered, "We did something good, didn't we?"